Good afternoon, everybody. It's Brian with Exact IT, and I have my cohort here, Mr. Reginald Andre from Arc Solvers in Miami, Florida. Today is Monday, May 10th, 2021. This is a special Monday recording of Security Squawk podcast because I have to travel later this week, and Andre was kind enough to record the show with me today on Monday. And then next week, we're going to be together somewhere in the United States, and we're going to do it live together. So that's going to be another special recording. So welcome, sir. Before we get into the hot topics of the week, how are you?
I'm doing well, man. I look forward to actually meeting you in person for the first time.
I know, right? Yeah, it's going to be. We've known each other for a while now, virtually, and it's going to be cool getting together and slapping hands and maybe having a few drinks together.
Yeah,
looking forward to it. So, crappy day here in Philly. We got cold and clouds for the last 3 days. I'm dying for some 80-degree and sunny weather. My whole entire family seems to be moving to Florida, so that's one thing. But yeah, I really miss the warm weather. I can't wait for it to warm up around here, and then in 2 months I'll be bitching about how hot it is. So all right. So let's jump into the topics for today. Let's see what we got. I got my social media accounts up here. I got all kinds of articles I want to share. What do you think we're going to talk about today?
Colonial Pipeline.
Oh, what happened with Colonial Pipeline? What is the Colonial Pipeline? Let's start there.
Well, they're the biggest on the east side.
Yeah, the biggest pipeline, pretty much on the East Coast, right? So it must take refined fuel from Texas and move it through the country. So it goes from Texas through Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, Georgia, South Carolina, North Carolina, Virginia, Maryland, Delaware, all the way up into where I'm at in New Jersey. And then there's it's almost like a river. There's little offshoots that feed different parts of the country. And they shut down. They can't move the gas now, right? So we can sit here and speculate on what's going to happen with that particular situation, on whether or not we're going to have gas shortages in those areas of the country. I'm already hearing reports of rural areas in like South Carolina already are out of gas. Mm-hmm. And basically what this pipeline does, it delivers the gas to those. You ever drive around and see those big white round things?
Yeah.
So these pipelines pump gas into those, and it's stored there until it's put on trucks or however it's delivered to your local gas station. And that's how this stuff gets to your car at the end of the day. And now cyber criminals have set their sights on this company that owns Colonial Pipeline, and they've done some damage. They've put some ransomware out there that has effectively shut down their whole entire network. Because as you know, as we talked about on this podcast, when you have an event, you got to disconnect from the internet. You gotta stop the bleeding. Mm-hmm. And they've done that. But the result of that is now they can't move this gas from point A to point B to point C to point D, and it's at a complete standstill. And one thing that I'll give you is, this is a big attack, but in my opinion, in terms of the amount of people that this is going to affect, this is going to be one of the biggest, right? Because SolarWinds was pretty damn big, but it didn't affect the everyday person, right? It didn't affect somebody getting food, gas, medical care. SolarWinds just upset a lot of people who knew that their information got accessed or their email got read, that necessarily you wouldn't expect that to be going on. Somebody else reading your stuff or getting access to files that you feel like are private. And then you have the Microsoft Exchange one, which was a pretty big one in my opinion as well. But it didn't affect a lot of people, right? That affects like IT administrators, right? And if you got ransomware through it, yeah, it affects like your company, right? But this is going to be huge. What's your perspective? That's my perspective. What's your perspective on what an attack on, a natural resource like gasoline is? It's still very important. We haven't adopted electric cars, probably like it's going to be in 10 years. People still need gas to fly, because I believe that this pipeline delivered a lot of jet fuel.
Yeah.
Cars. What else, maybe I'm just thinking kind of narrow-minded here. What are you thinking in terms of the impact of this?
No, absolutely. This is going to be one of the first ones where it's actually going to affect that consumer market, because according to several news articles, this company transports 45% of the fuel consumed on the East Coast.
Right.
So that's about 50 million Americans. And apparently, I believe they said it 2 days, 2 more days, if these systems are still turned off, Americans are going to start feeling it.
Yep. And so I'll bring up one point of contention that I'm hearing with people. Something like this, that's an attack on a major piece of the American way, right? Mm-hmm. Cars and gasoline are the American way. Would you agree or disagree with me?
Yeah, no, absolutely.
So now there's an attack on the American way. Right now, this might affect people filling up their boats, filling up their cars, doing the things that they like to do, getting to work. This could have a lot of impacts when it comes to transportation. And I guess the debate is this an attack? Should this be labeled an attack, or is this just a hack? Is this just another cyber criminal event, and we're going too far by labeling all of these cyber events as cyber attacks or using the word attack? And I guess the context behind why I bring that up is I've heard from a lot of people in the last few days about this attack, and there's a very, I wouldn't say a minority, but there's a very good number of people that are getting frustrated with the fact that we're calling these attacks. And I guess when you call it an attack, the expectation is that you're going to retaliate to that attack. And because there's a lack of retaliation by the United States, by, I'll say, government and private business, should we be calling these things attacks? And is that a concern for you, the terminology, or are people just like finding things to fight about? What's your opinion on that?
All right. So the way I look at it is, look at the CIA's budget. CIA's budget, I'm Googling it now, it's approximately $81 billion. What does the CIA do for us? What do we know what they do for us, right? They don't normally go on the news and they don't portray, oh, this is what we did last week and we caused this to happen, and they don't do any of that. So my opinion on that is, if Russia, if China, if North Korea gets hacked, their news media is not going to admit it. Their news media is going to blame it. They may not even report it. It just may be just another day, another power outage. So I think that at the same time, the U.S. is not going to also say, yeah, we got them back, we sucker punched them, or things like that. So I do think there's a lot happening in the background that we don't know about, that's happening to these other countries that may be doing this, that other countries are just not going to report it because they don't want to admit that their infrastructure is weak or their network is weak or whatever like that. So I think the U.S. is doing something. There is just because of the nature of how they operate, they don't necessarily televise it, like how when we get hacked, companies are having to tell people because of their public companies or whatever the case is.
Yeah, I agree with you, but the thing of it is like we understand that as IT people because we kind of have that in, and we study it, and we know kind of what they do at the CIA, the NSA, even at CISA to an extent around this stuff. But is that enough when people are seeing this stuff and people are worried about? I mean, what is the number one thing that most people bitch about? It's gas prices. Well, gas prices are going up because of this. So when gas prices go up, or people can't get gas and people can't live the life that they want to live, I mean, just look at what we just went through in the last year, with coronavirus. I mean, seriously, like now you're telling people you got to stay home and now you can't get gas. When is the average American just going to look at this and, read the headlines and say, why the hell isn't our government doing something about it? Like, I mean, I've literally heard people say that we should be doing military type things to countries that do this. Do you agree with that? Or are we taking it too far by taking one of these attacks and then translating that to military action?
I take it as it's an attack, and I'm not saying eye for an eye, but if our infrastructure or if our gas lines get disrupted, and if the U.S. knows how to do it and have the capabilities and know for sure which country is doing it or which country is allowing it, then yeah, go for it. But that's just gonna start. It's gonna start even a bigger. Right. So I think they have to look at it without the hothead, kind of like, all right, how do we diplomatically and retaliate to this without now, we shoot at them, they shoot at us, and now before you know it, it's World War III.
Right. So now I want to propose to you another perspective. And this is kind of my perspective. At least it's been my perspective to this date. I don't know if I'm changing my mind. Probably not. But are we not like maybe we shouldn't be looking at this as like an eye for an eye, as you said, and looking at this as like, oh, they did this to us, so now we got to do this to them. And rather we look at this as, hey, we're not doing a good enough job with cybersecurity. This is our fault that this happened. This is our problem. We're not putting the protections in place. Like, if you live in a high crime area and you leave your front door open and your house gets robbed and you run out of your house going, it's the neighborhood's fault. It's the block captain's fault. It's the police's fault, right? It's kind of like the same thing. It's like these companies and individuals won't understand this, and their initial reaction to this is going to be an ignorant one or an uneducated one, and they're going to say, "Oh, well, we need to respond. We need to attack." Well, no. What if we take that energy that we're going to spend doing that, and we just shore up our cybersecurity? Mm-hmm. What do you think about that as an option versus we just need to retaliate against everybody that does this stuff?
All right, so let's take it back to 1941 Pearl Harbor attack.
Okay.
So that was a surprise military strike by the Japanese. Mm-hmm. And now that happened, so now the military has put in let's just say technology or equipment or surveillance that if you got 50 bombers coming your way, you now know that, hey, something is about to go down, and they have measures to hopefully be able to protect the building or whatever the case is. So I think it's both. You have to strike back like they end up doing, and also put in the technology to make sure that it, at least in this case in technology, we're talking about, stopping it.
Got it.
Yeah. So
let's go into this Forbes article. I'm going to share up on the screen here. My sharing skills have been lacking lately, so I apologize. I'm going to share this up. Forbes, 7 crisis management lessons from Colonial Pipeline's response to cyber attack. And then Ed Segal, who's a contributor for Forbes, wrote that Friday's ransomware attack on Colonial Pipeline created a crisis for the company and the country, and is providing several important lessons for business leaders on how to respond and manage crisis situations. And quite frankly, that's what we do on this podcast, right?
Right.
This was our goal when we started this podcast, was to get this information out there so business leaders can learn and start to understand how they need to respond to this stuff and what they need to do way before something like this even happens to them. God forbid. You need to start planning ahead of time, not after the fact. So as reported by Washington Post, Colonial's 5,500 miles of pipelines carry fuel from refineries on the Gulf Coast to customers in southern and eastern U.S. It says it transports 45% of the fuel consumed on East Coast, reaching 50 million Americans. That is insane, dude. Like, that is a lot of fuel and a lot of people that could potentially not have fuel. Mm-hmm. It'll be interesting to see how this goes, how long it goes. Major test for Biden. The attack presents a major test for how the Biden administration will respond to cyber attacks on critical infrastructure at a time when hackers are increasingly targeting essential utility services. The outage, depending on its duration and who is found to be behind it, could send fuel prices in the southern U.S. above $3 a gallon. And then the attack on the CNN says comes amid rising concerns over cybersecurity vulnerabilities in America's critical infrastructure following recent incidents and after the Biden administration last month launched an effort to beef up cybersecurity in the nation's power grid, calling for industry leaders to install technologies that could thwart attacks on the electricity supply. We've talked about a lot about this. I mean, I don't even know where to go with this because the reality of it is I have an idea for this that I'm not going to share today because I want to research it a little bit, and I think what I have in my mind, it might be premature to say it, but I do have an idea behind how we can fix this. But you and I talk about this all the time. Devices and software are put out onto market with vulnerabilities in them while they're on the market.
Yep.
So it's one of those things where cybersecurity starts at there. Like, that's where it starts. It starts with the hardware and software manufacturers making sure that they're not putting out devices that can be hacked and vulnerable. So the question becomes, how much time are these companies and how much investment are they making in not the functionality of the product, but whether or not the product was built securely enough on the proper standards that are going to make it a secure device. So when the consumer goes to the store and buys it and then puts it in their home or on their network, that they're not going to now become a victim of a cyber attack simply because they chose a certain product over another. Mm-hmm. So initial lessons he goes into, although the crisis continues to unfold, it's not too soon to point out some of the best practices that are being followed by Colonial Pipeline and the U.S. government. So the first thing that he mentions is tell people what happens, right? You and I talk about that all the time. Companies like to stay tight-lipped, or they like to say, like, well, no data was taken, right, in the first 12 hours of an attack. What is your perspective on what companies should be doing after a cyber attack? Like, how transparent should they be? What should they be telling people when they go out and after a cyber attack?
Well, I think companies have to be as transparent and on a need-to-know basis. You don't want to give too much information where it's giving tactics. But I think as far as what information has been compromised, I think that's very important to both the consumers. But at the same time, then this is when politics comes in, because you have shareholders, you have investors, and the last thing that they want is this company stock or the value of this company to tumble. So I think that's the balancing act, especially for these type of large companies. But for the businesses that you deal with, I think it's important to notify the authorities, to get their help, to get their assistance, and be as transparent as possible. Because if there was it's kind of one of those things. quick story. One time my car got stolen, and 2 or 3 days later, I'm looking for my spare key, and then I remember, oh my gosh, my spare key was actually in my car because one time I needed it, and then I ended up finding my other key. And then I actually did tell the police and the insurance that we thought they towed the car away, but no, it was because my car was open and the spare key was like in the little middle compartment. So I think it's important that you have to just tell the truth and be transparent. If there was a mistake, if there was an error, if there was a software that had a vulnerability, you have to tell others so that they can be protected and lessons can be learned from that.
So the next thing he says is call in the experts. Obviously, kind of pretty obvious. Establish priorities, which should be done in your plan, right? You shouldn't be figuring out what the priorities are when you're in the middle of being attacked and you have ransomware, flashing up on your screen. That's the wrong time to establish priorities. Priorities should be established beforehand, because as I state, people are going to forget things. So don't speculate. Now, people could say I'm speculating by calling out dark side already. I'm not. I've done enough research where it's pretty evident that the people who I trust that are doing the research know that this is dark side, or at least they're the ones repping, saying that we are the ones who've done it. And I'll show that to everybody here in a minute. But Scott Sobel, he's a senior vice president for crisis and litigation communications at K Global, a public affairs and public relations firm. And interesting that they interviewed a public relations guy before a cyber guy, because what happens in a cyber attack? What's one of the things you're going to have to hire?
Forensic.
Or no, public relations firm.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah.
I mean, to do this, or you can try it on your own. But we saw how that went with in the early days. I remember the what was that hack? The hospitals. I can't remember the name of the company. UHS and King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. They had a major cyber attack, and like the first 2 days, they were trying to do their own public relations, and it wasn't going well. They were taking messages down, putting different messages back up, and then after a few days, it seemed like they reached out to a professional firm. Colonial and the authorities bit the bullet and shut the rest of Colonial's pipeline systems not affected by the first attack. This preemptive action took control from the terrorists and mitigated the long-term effects, the intimidation and leverage the terrorists had hoped for. That's a little speculative. You don't know how far they got, and with any attack, you're taking everything offline. You can't trust anything, right? You don't have telemetry to tell you that this system wasn't touched, that system wasn't touched. You got to take it all offline. It's that simple. And then do your forensics. And then Sobel goes on to say you want to send the right message, that you're being proactive, you're being upfront. Colonial, and like he says, they have large pockets, and they got to start putting the money where it is. So like when this is all over, you need to reassure the country that you're putting the resources to cybersecurity so this will never happen again. And anybody else that's in this business is going to have to do the same thing, right? So then the article goes on to say to isolate the problem, and that name looks familiar.
Oh, look at that. Wow. So congratulations.
Forbes reached out to me, and I was able to contribute to this article, and I'm very grateful for that. And, as I've said before, isolate the problem. And with any cyber attack, the first thing you want to do is isolate it by disconnecting it from the internet. And then I go on to say that once that's done, your team needs to come in and determine if the data was exfiltrated and what leverage they have to reduce the ransom demand, if at all. And once they decide to pay the ransom or not, they're looking at a heavy investment for new infrastructure, because you can't rebuild on the same network that was infected. You're starting over. And if anybody comes in and tells you that you can use the same stuff, I'd head for the hills and go hire another company.
Yeah.
Because nobody should be using the same equipment, because you have no clue if that equipment still has a backdoor that was planted when they were in there doing all this stuff. You're starting over. So part of your incident response plan should include a list of things that you need to go and buy right away. Because guess what? You need to put the order in Friday, last Friday, for it to be there when you're actually allowed to start coming back up again. So then it just went through a couple other things that I gave for advice about incident response planning, that you need to identify your assets. You need to put a plan in place to protect them. That includes an incident response plan, implementing tools to detect them, and then executing a recovery that will make, if you do it ahead of time, it'll make the event much easier to get through. You're prone to mistakes, and that's what I always say. You're prone to mistakes, human error, forgetting things, and that leads to longer recovery times, larger loss of revenue, and it's always less expensive to take care of things on the left side of the boom than the right side of the boom. And you've heard me say that on this podcast before. So more cyber attacks ahead. Of course, Brad Brooks of One Login says that, things are escalating quickly with cybersecurity. That's an understatement, in my opinion. And, controlling and knowing who has access to your IT systems is a board level priority for every company. And I can't agree with that statement more. Right. And then I kind of like what you said here. We're moving into an invisible Cold War that was focused on stealing data to a highly visible hot war that had real implications for physical property in people's lives. Right. So, these types of events that we're talking about today, Andre and I deal with this stuff on a daily basis. We kind of live and breathe it. Right. Because we work together. Even we've talked about this before. We're people can look at us as competitors, but I don't look at us as competitors. I look at us as teammates, trying to do the best we can for our clients and our industry and what we do every day in our company, right? Well, to uphold our mission, as our two companies have very similar missions, that line up, right? And that's the Cold War that we kind of see every day, that the rest of the public doesn't see. It's an event like this that brings it out, right? And how bad it is from where we see it, right, Andre?
Yeah.
When it gets to the general population and the general public, it's going to seem really freaking bad when people start to realize what's going on. It's kind of like the overnight success phenomenon, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's like you see a person and like, man, they made it overnight. Yet you weren't following them for 10, 15 years while they were building their career, right? They have a hit album, or they go viral, and it's like, this person just got it overnight, but they didn't go viral because they put out one video. They went viral because the 5,000th video they put out went viral, or the 5,000th song or the 100th song that somebody recorded, was a hit. It's going to be the same thing with this stuff. It's going to be cyber attack, and boom, one's going to be boom, big. And then the rest of the public, not their fault, but just because this stuff doesn't get covered enough in mainstream media, but they're going to turn around and go, how did all this happen so quickly? And meanwhile, ransomware started in 2007. We're 15 years into this, right? And we're at a point now where the cyber criminals are just winning, and that's the reality. So, anything you want to add to that? I just wanted to give people that perspective, because everybody's going to start hearing a lot more about this stuff, and a lot of people are going to be like, how did this start all of a sudden? It's not all of a sudden. This has been building and building and building. They just got smarter about their methodologies and the targets that they want to hit.
I hate to say it, but maybe we do need the gas prices to go up, and for this to go through, so that people's attention and people can now start going to the government. And Biden has his George Bush 9/11 moment where he goes to the podium and like, hey, this is the last time. Like, we're going to go hammer on any country that does this again.
Yep.
So
it'd be interesting to see what happens. I mean, I don't know. I'm a little skeptical at this point because, like I said, Andre and I have been dealing with this for a long time, and it just seems like nothing gets done at a high level. It's all, these IT companies out here going to battle against these attackers for these private businesses that don't know what to do or how to handle this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
So jumping into an article from Saturday by Bloomberg, and it just goes into Colonial hackers stole data Thursday ahead of shutdown. So before they deployed the ransomware, as I beat on my own YouTube channel and on this podcast, they steal the data first. And Andre and I talk about it all the time. They love to come out and say, hey, we don't think any data was stolen. And then a month later, as Andre famously says, on a Friday, late Friday, they dropped that, million records were actually stolen in that attack. So attackers stole nearly 100 gigs of data in 2 hours. Not bad. It's pretty good bandwidth.
Yeah, it's a good upload.
On Thursday, theft followed by locking of computers and ransom demand. And it just goes in to say that hackers who caused the Colonial Pipeline to shut down, the biggest U.S. gasoline pipeline on Friday, began their blitz against the company a day earlier. Quite frankly, they were probably in there well before that, right? This is when they decided to go. Stealing a large amount of data before locking the computers with ransomware and demanding payment, according to people familiar with the matter. The intruders were part of a cyber crime gang called DarkSide. So anybody that wants to question where I'm getting this from, it's right here on Bloomberg. Nearly 100 gigs of data out of the Alpharetta, Georgia-based company's network in just 2 hours Thursday. 2 people involved with Colonial's investigation said. Double extortion scheme. It's a hallmark of every ransomware group that is doing anything today. Colonial was threatened that the stolen data would be leaked to the internet while the information was encrypted by the hackers on the computers inside the network would remain locked until the ransom was paid. The company didn't immediately respond to requests, and quite frankly, they haven't responded as of today, midday Monday. And then I thought somewhere in this article, I read that they reached out to DarkSide, and DarkSide denied, or DarkSide wouldn't confirm or deny it. But I think that we're going to see within the next couple of days. The fact that DarkSide hasn't released anything on their public release site yet tells me that Colonial is negotiating. So that's just my take on it. What's your take, sir?
100 gigs of data. I mean, we're speculating, but we can be talking about schematics.
So the interesting thing for me is like I've seen this before. It could be 100 gigs on the initial hit, and then they encrypted the 100. They started encrypting the 100 gigs, but they were pulling more data at the same time.
Yeah,
like 100 gigs is the initial.
Yeah,
and then when they hit the ransomware, right? So this is how it goes down, folks. They get in there, they go in, they hit this network. They want to get the data off in a form that they can. Right, they can't encrypt it first and then take it because now they just stole encrypted data, which is useless to them. They take the data, now they have it, then they start encrypting the 100 gigs that they just stole while they're offloading more data. Ransomware doesn't happen like that. Ransomware takes time to go through all these files and encrypt them. It is quick, but it doesn't. Somebody doesn't just click a button and poof, like. Terabytes of data is encrypted. It takes time for that to happen. So the reason they take that initial 100 gigs is because they take it. So if any point in time during the encryption process, somebody catches something and stops them, they still have the 100 gigs that they can hold over your head and say, oh, well, we didn't get the ransomware deployed, but look, we have all this information that we're going to release if you don't pay us money.
Mm-hmm.
Right. And the pipeline doesn't get shut down. And, we're not in that same place. So they don't have as much leverage to ask for as much money. But as you can see, that's just kind of, how it could have went down. That's not how it actually went down. We're now dealing with a serious crisis here where the pipeline is shut down and, the U.S. is potentially looking at a gas shortage here in the next week or two.
Yeah.
So. Anything you want to add? I'm going to wrap up the show today.
No, I mean, it's so interesting that we said we are going to do this podcast on a Monday, and here we are. We got like the topic where, this is
Right.
So.
Oh, and by the way, Andre and I didn't even get to it. I don't even think we have to, because I think we covered a lot on this show. But Tulsa, Oklahoma, the city of Oklahoma, is also dealing with a ransomware attack as we speak. On Friday, they were hit, and their entire city is basically shut down. So it just goes to show, now this is going to bring awareness to the people of Oklahoma and the people of Tulsa, right? And they're going to want answers from their elected officials on why this happened. And this is how cybersecurity is going to organically be a thing that people take seriously, because customers, constituents, employees are going to demand it from the people that they're doing business with and the people that they work for, because they're tired of having their information stolen and put on the dark web, and having that chance of having their identity stolen and things like that. So anything else, sir?
No, just reading. I'm just reading there an article about it, and again, it happened over the weekend, and this is what they said. The city said no customer information was compromised, but residents will experience delays in networking services, and then they go on to list the things that the residents can't do.
Well, that goes back to our article, our Forbes article, where it says, get the information out, but don't get the wrong information out. Exactly. Right? Don't tell somebody, or don't tell a news outlet that you haven't had any data stolen, when there's no way anybody could tell you that in the first 24 hours.
Right.
I mean, I would be highly skeptical. You can, bury your head in the sand, so to speak, and say nothing was stolen because you don't have the data to determine that, which is definitely the case. But the rule of thumb is if you don't have the telemetry, or you don't have the logs, or you can't go back and prove whether or not somebody was in a system or not, you have to assume that they were.
Yeah.
Right. So what that means is, if you don't understand what I said, in the IT world, we have things called logging, and logging is basically a record of everything that happens on a system. And some people turn that on, and some people turn it off, and sometimes they don't turn it on, and it's turned off by default from, let's say, Microsoft, and you have to go in as an administrator and make sure these things are turned on and configured properly. If you don't have that stuff, you're automatically assuming that the data was exfiltrated, or they got to that system. You're not, just because you don't have it, you can't just say, well, it didn't happen.
Mm-hmm.
And that's important for people to know, because I guess it's easy for people to think, well, we don't have the data, so obviously it didn't happen, because there's nothing telling us that it did happen. Well, you didn't have the sensor turned on in the first place to tell you whether it was happened.
Yeah.
And that's the reality. So yeah, good luck to Colonial, and good luck to Tulsa. And I'm sure next week, when we're in Austin, we'll have more to talk about.
Yeah.
All right. So I'm going to wrap up the show. Any parting words?
No, we're all good, man. Look forward to seeing you next week. Hopefully there's enough gas and the planes can
right.
take us there.
Yeah, right. Exactly. So, all right. So we're going to wrap up the show. Remember, folks, we don't get paid for this podcast. We don't do sponsorships, and we don't annoy you with promotions in the middle of it. We just ask that you share out our podcast on social media. We record this live on Facebook and YouTube. Just hit the share button, share it out to your friends and family. Let them know that this exists. Start getting them educated on the threats that are out there and the things that they can do to start protecting themselves. That's what we try to help you do on this channel. If you ever have any questions, you ever wonder about anything we talk about on this show, head over to those places on YouTube and Facebook and drop a comment on any of our videos. We monitor that, and we will answer any questions. The final thing that I ask, rate us on your favorite podcast channel. So if you're listening to us while you're working out, while you're driving to work, or whatever you're doing, we appreciate it. Give us a 5-star review, and maybe take 13 to 90 seconds of your life and write a nice little review and tell people why they should listen to this podcast and what benefit it brings you. And maybe it'll bring them the same benefit. So that's how it helps us out. So that's it for me. Sayonara, Andre. I'll see you next week, sir.
All right.
Take care. Bye, everyone.